So one would have heard about the clinical trials, especially during the COVID-19, when countries were developing vaccines at war footing to tackle the pandemic. Now, clinical trials are medical scientific trials of new medicines or devices or treatments on humans to understand how effective they are on people. So typically they are conducted in phases. So the first test is actually on small group of people after determining their safe dosage, side effects, etc. Right? So thereafter, the tests are conducted on larger groups, and depending on the outcome of trials, they are introduced in the market for the entire population.
Right. So actually, one must understand how these clinical trials are carried out. Typically, researchers or medical professionals who are researchers, they determine the objective for which a clinical trial is to be introduced. Thereafter, they set out laying a procedure as to how to carry out the clinical trial. Then comes the important part of recruiting volunteers who would want to voluntarily undergo these trials on them. Okay.
Yeah.
And during the course of the trial as well as thereafter, the research teams constantly monitor these volunteers, the people who voluntarily signed up, to check for side effects, to check for effectiveness and efficacy of the either the treatment or the medication or the equipment or the vaccine, and so on and so forth.
So India is actually one of the top countries for carrying out clinical trials after USA and China. So the reasons for that, it's of course the large and diverse ethnic population which we have. And there are also diverse diseases and health conditions in people. Then the availability of skilled medical and research professionals and state-of-art hospitals and medical facilities. Most important factor is the cost-effective process to carry out these clinical trials, right? So it is widely believed that the second and final phase of the trial cost is almost 60% lesser in India as compared to other countries like US, France, right? So in fact, if you see, Russia and Ukraine also were preferred destinations by giant pharma companies, but due to the war, that has been stopped currently.
Right. So, Subhadra, what you have mentioned, all of this cost effectiveness is all beneficial to the pharmaceutical companies and the pharma industry in general. But what's in it for the volunteers or the people who are volunteering to be part of these clinical trials? See, one must understand typically they are either economically backward people or uneducated people. They are looking for sound treatment, or where they can't afford one, they're looking for treatment where they can't afford one, or they are paid a fixed sum of money till the clinical trials last. And in several cases, if there is permanent damage or death, there is a fixed sum of compensation that is paid to these volunteers of clinical trials. So probably that's like a clickbait for them to actually want to participate, right?
Right.
See, but how does this work? Now, there is something called the Clinical Trials Registry. It's an online website that is managed by ICMR, Indian Council of Medical Research. Now, this website contains details of different types of clinical trials that are being carried out in the country. And in some cases, they also give out information of clinical trials being carried out in countries where there are no such public platforms available, so that they want to participate. Should anyone want to participate, they can go there. So volunteers can look up on this website, and depending on what they want, let's say, for example, a patient is suffering from asthma and there is a clinical trial for a better medicine or an inhaler or something. So he can actually click on that link and go and sign up and volunteer to be a part of that clinical trial.
Yeah. So there are a lot of challenges in clinical trials. I think the most important one is the quality of the drug which they use on the trials, or even the procedure which they carry out, right? But the ethical aspect of the clinical trial is the biggest challenge which we face. So there have been instances of abuse of volunteers who have signed up for these trials. And I think the biggest casualty, as we all know, is the human capital out here. So in 2009, trials were conducted for HPV vaccine for cervical cancer. So in Andhra Pradesh and Gujarat, it was reported that almost 16,000 tribal girls were administered this trial dose without their knowledge and consent. So few girls were even reportedly died due to these kind of side effects. The other one is in 2011, unethical drug trials were carried out on more than 279 people in Bhopal hospital, of which more than 200 were the Bhopal gas tragedy victims. Right? So they were administered drugs and medicines without even their own knowledge and consent. And more than 10 patients were also gas victims who died due to drug complications.
Right.
So two things which come into place here is the first thing is since they were already sick people, they were ineligible, number one, for their trials. And second thing is they did not even know about the trials which were conducted on them. And they were just made to sign a form.
Right. Actually, as you were saying, I vaguely remember reading in 2012, something similar happened in Indore, where a couple of doctors, I think psychiatrists, more than a dozen psychiatrists, had unethically administered some clinical drugs, which was on a trial basis, to mentally ill patients. Obviously, given their mental condition, they were not aware of what was being administered to them. Now, quite a few of them died. And unfortunately, the only once the whole thing became big and it caught the national attention, the doctors were arrested and they were let off after paying penalties of 5,000 rupees. Right now, what is the unethical part here in this case, and in generally across several clinical trials, is poor people are targeted, economically backward sections, poor people, uneducated people, who have no knowledge of what is being given to them or administered to them. In fact, I remember in this Bhopal gas victims that you had mentioned, I was reading somewhere where they were, whenever a medicine was given to them, a syrup or the medicine was given to them, they were made to sign a form saying that we have taken this medicine. Actually, it was not that. So neither did they have knowledge, and their consent was taken without their knowledge, right? So it is it's an understatement if we say that humans were used as guinea pigs in these clinical trials.
So it is not that there are no laws or regulatory authorities for governing the clinical trials in India. We have the Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940, the Medical Council of Indian Act of 1956, and also the Central Council for Indian Medicine Act of 1970. These are all the key legislations governing mostly the clinical trials. Now, if you look at the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, it actually envisages uniform implementation of these provisions for ensuring the safety, the rights, well-being of the patients by regulating the drugs and cosmetics. Now, coming on to the drugs and cosmetics again is the Central Drug Standard Control Organization, which is also responsible for approval of the drugs, conductions of clinical trial. It also lays down the standards for the drugs that can be used for these clinical trials and the quality of imported drugs in the country.
Right. The act and the rules that you have mentioned are very much in existence. Though they are in existence, what was lacking is their effective implementation. With growing instances of abuse of patients, several NGOs and social activists filed PILs in the Supreme Court. Okay, and there were several landmark cases which came out from 2013. For the benefit of our viewers, we'll keep it simple. What was the outcome of these cases? These cases laid down, thanks to the Supreme Court, they laid down regulations of clinical trials, ensuring transparency by publishing clinical trial data. Okay, and also laying down guidelines to protect people who are participating in such clinical trials. In fact, in one of the cases, the Supreme Court had rapped the union government for its inertia on this issue. And this led to the Union Health Ministry bringing out the Drugs and Clinical Trials rules in 2019. Again, what are the key provisions? The key provisions focus on the ethical aspects of the clinical trials, like the participants being well informed about the procedure and how it will be carried out, and the side effects and everything to be informed to them beforehand, and thereafter get their consent, both verbal and documented, that is written. Then maintaining their identities private so that they ensure confidentiality. That is also like privacy is also a constitutional right. Making public data of such clinical trials, including any adverse effects, deaths, casualties, fatalities, etc. And it will also make the pharma companies, this was done basically to make the pharma companies be accountable and responsible for the actions of the clinical trials they are taking on unsuspecting people.
There has been multifold increase in conduct of clinical trials, both communicable, non-communicable diseases which are on the rise. So with COVID-19 ravaging the world, there was more than ever need for clinical research and trials. So ethical concerns and most crucial in situations where humans are subjects for research. So ensuring that economically low and uneducated people are not exploited, this is the most important concern today. And ensuring that they are being informed, consent is taken, patient awareness is there for their rights, safety, compensation, and access to the test results are very crucial. So right to life, privacy is also envisaged as a fundamental right, which has always been guaranteed by the Constitution of India. I hope our viewers have benefited out of this informative episode. So thank you for watching and see you next time. Thank you.